Part 1. An ordinary home, a growing unease. The house on Pine Hill was everything I thought I wanted. It was nestled at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by trees that seemed to keep the outside world at bay. I'd recently moved in after a long search for a place to call my own, and at first, everything seemed perfect. The living room had a fireplace. The floors creaked in that comforting way that old houses do, and the backyard had just enough space for a small garden. It was calm, peaceful, normal. The first week went by without incident. I unpacked, rearranged things, and settled into the rhythm of the house. But by the end of that first week, something started to feel off. It wasn't anything specific, just a growing sense of unease that I couldn't shake. It was subtle at first. I'd hear the occasional creak when I was alone, but I figured it was just the house settling. After all, it was an old house. The wind would rattle the windows, and the floorboards would groan underfoot. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore. At night, when I would turn off the lights and lay down to sleep, I would often hear something faint. It was the sound of footsteps, soft, slow, and deliberate, walking across the upstairs hallway. The first time it happened, I thought it was just my imagination, but as the nights went on, the footsteps continued. Always the same pattern, slow, almost methodical. I would get up, walk through the house, and check every room. But every time, there was nothing. No one. The silence that followed was always more unsettling than the noise itself. It was almost as though the house was watching me. Part 2. The door that wouldn't stay closed. As the days went by, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. I would leave a room, only to find the door I had just closed was wide open when I came back. At first, I convinced myself it was a simple mistake. Maybe I hadn't closed it all the way. But it happened too often to be a coincidence. I started checking the doors and windows every time I left a room. They would always be fine, but every now and then, one door, the door to the attic, would swing open on its own, as if inviting me to investigate. I avoided the attic at first. There was nothing in it except a few old boxes and some insulation. I'd peek up there every now and then, but it never seemed to hold much interest for me. But then, one evening, the door to the attic opened on its own while I was sitting in the living room. I heard it. The creak of the old wood, the slow, deliberate movement, followed by the door swinging wide open. The house had been silent just moments before, and now I was standing there, staring at an open door, staring at the space beyond it. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The air felt different, charged, almost. The sound of the door opening was followed by an odd sensation, like someone was standing behind me, breathing down my neck. I turned quickly, expecting to see someone there, but there was no one. I walked slowly toward the attic door, unsure of what I was hoping to find. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling, and as I opened it, the musty smell of the attic hit me. I stepped inside, shining my flashlight into the dim space, but I didn't see anything unusual. No signs of movement, no fresh footprints. It was just empty. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. And then I heard it again. The sound of footsteps, but this time coming from behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. There was nothing there. I backed away slowly, the feeling of being watched growing more intense, like someone was just out of sight, waiting. I quickly shut the attic door and locked it, but deep down I knew that wouldn't stop whatever was in the house. Part 3. The final encounter. By now I couldn't ignore it anymore. The feeling of being watched had turned into something darker. It was as though someone was waiting for me to make a mistake. I couldn't sleep at night without hearing the footsteps, always pacing the hallway above me, growing louder with each passing day. I began to avoid certain parts of the house, particularly the attic, which I hadn't opened since that night. It all came to a head one night. I had come home late from work, exhausted and desperate to get some sleep. But as soon as I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The house felt colder, the air heavier. I walked through the hallway, glancing at the staircase, and that's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of someone walking upstairs. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just footsteps. There was a scraping sound, like something or someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. I froze. I knew no one was up there. I hadn't seen a soul all day. But the sound was growing louder, closer, until I could almost hear the floorboards bending beneath the weight of whoever or whatever was moving around upstairs. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my breath shallow and quick. The silence after that dragging noise felt unbearable. But it didn't last. The footsteps resumed, now coming down the stairs, one slow, deliberate step after another. I backed away, fear coursing through my veins, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned to run, but the door to the basement slammed shut in front of me, as if to trap me inside. Panic set in. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife from the drawer, and stood there, waiting, watching every corner, every shadow, for any sign of movement. And then I saw it. A figure, tall, dark, and unblinking, standing at the top of the stairs, staring down at me. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. But I could feel its eyes on me. I could feel the pressure building in the room, suffocating me. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, and I dropped to my knees, unable to look away from the figure. Just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The house went silent again, too silent. I don't know how long I stayed there, crouched on the floor, waiting for something, anything to happen. But it didn't. The silence stretched on, and when I finally found the courage to stand, the house felt empty. I couldn't stay another night. I packed my things and I left. I don't know what was in that house, but I know I'll never go back. Part 1. A secluded retreat. I needed a break, a real one. So when a friend offered me the chance to get away for a weekend at her family's secluded cabin in the woods, I jumped at the opportunity. The cabin was hidden away on a piece of land far from civilization, a place that felt like it was straight out of a postcard, tall pine trees, a clear blue lake, and a cozy structure that seemed to invite nothing but peace and quiet. It was exactly what I needed to reset. We arrived late in the evening, and by the time we unloaded our things and settled in, the sun had long gone, leaving only the soft glow of lanterns and the moon to light the way. The air was crisp, and the sounds of the forest, crickets chirping, the rustling of the trees in the wind, felt oddly comforting, like nature itself was wrapping its arms around us. My friend Sarah had been there many times before. She seemed completely at ease, but I couldn't shake the strange feeling I had, as if something was watching us from the edges of the woods. I dismissed it as first-night nerves. After all, being in a remote place like this could make anyone feel on edge. But that night, after a few drinks and hours of casual conversation by the fire, the unease didn't go away. It wasn't until later, after we had gone to bed, that I heard it. The first noise. At first it was faint, a soft scraping sound, like something was dragging against the wood. I tried to ignore it, but the longer it continued, the more persistent it became. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the house settling, it was something else. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my heartbeat quickening. Was it an animal outside? Maybe a branch scraping the roof? But no, this was different. It wasn't natural. It was deliberate. The sound stopped suddenly, leaving a thick, oppressive silence behind. But that silence felt heavier, like something had just been waiting for me to acknowledge it. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just my imagination. But when I heard the scraping again, this time louder and closer, I couldn't pretend anymore. I sat up in bed, wide-eyed and frozen in place. The cabin was silent now, too silent. And then, from outside the window, I heard the unmistakable sound of a whisper, low, muffled, but distinctly there. "Get out." Part 2. The whisper that followed. The whisper was the last thing I expected to hear. It didn't make sense. No one was outside. No one was supposed to be out there. I scrambled out of bed, my heart pounding, and crept over to the window. The forest was dark, the moonlight barely enough to see past the first few trees. There was no movement, no sign of anything unusual. I shook my head, telling myself it was the wind playing tricks on me, or maybe even the stress of being away from home. I returned to bed, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. But sleep didn't come. I tossed and turned, every creak and groan of the old wooden cabin amplifying the tension in my chest. The whisper wouldn't leave me. I kept hearing it in my mind, the words echoing over and over. "Get out." When morning finally came, I was already up, standing by the window again, scanning the dark woods. Nothing had changed. Everything looked calm, peaceful, like nothing had happened. Sarah woke up soon after, completely unaware of the eerie events of the night. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I had to tell her what I'd heard. Sarah listened quietly, but when I mentioned the whisper, she looked at me oddly. "It's just the wind. Maybe the trees rubbing against the house," she suggested, but there was something in her eyes that made me second-guess everything. She wasn't scared. In fact, she seemed too calm. It was as if she'd heard those whispers before, like she knew exactly what was happening. As the day passed, I tried to shake off the unease, convincing myself I was overthinking it. We spent the afternoon by the lake, swimming, laughing, and enjoying the fresh air. But every now and then, I'd catch myself glancing toward the tree line, feeling eyes on me. I didn't tell Sarah that part. I didn't want to sound crazy. That night, after another long day of relaxing by the fire, I went to bed exhausted, hoping to get some sleep. But I wasn't as lucky as I had hoped. I was just about to drift off when I heard it again, the scraping sound followed by the whisper, "Leave, now." This time it was louder, more urgent, and I could almost feel the weight of it pressing against the window. I bolted out of bed and grabbed my phone, ready to call Sarah. But when I checked the time, I noticed something strange. The phone screen said it was 3 a.m., but the room was far too dark. It was deeper into the night than it should have been. Time felt wrong. The house felt wrong. I opened the door to Sarah's room and found it empty. The bed was made, but she was nowhere to be found. Panic hit me like a cold wave. I ran outside, frantically searching the area, but there was no sign of Sarah. The whisper came again, this time closer than before. "Run." Part 3, the truth behind the whispers. I didn't know what to do. My heart was pounding in my chest as I searched the cabin, calling for Sarah, but there was nothing. The place that had once felt like a refuge now felt like a cage. The whispering voices had become overwhelming, and I could feel their presence everywhere. There was no escape. I ran to the old shed out back, where Sarah often liked to go when she needed some quiet time. I flung the door open, and that's when I saw it, the truth. Sarah wasn't there, but what I did find was far worse. On the floor of the shed was a small, crumpled piece of paper with one simple word written on it: "Leave." Suddenly, everything clicked. The cabin, the forest, the whispers, it all felt like something that had been waiting for me, waiting for both of us. I felt a chill crawl down my spine as I realized that Sarah wasn't just some casual visitor here. She had been part of something, part of a story that had played out far before I ever arrived. I ran back to the cabin, and this time I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my things, bolted the door behind me, and sped off in my car without looking back. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw Sarah standing at the cabin's window, watching me leave. She didn't wave. She didn't even blink. The last thing I heard, just as I drove away, was the final whisper: "Don't come back." Part 1, a last-minute stay. It was supposed to be a quick pit stop on a long road trip. I'd been driving for hours, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting a red glow over the empty highway. The plan was simple: find a place to rest for the night, get some sleep, and hit the road again at dawn. But, as anyone who has ever driven through the middle of nowhere knows, options are limited. After miles of nothing but dark, lonely stretches of road, I finally saw the sign, a flickering neon light, reading, "Welcome to the Pines Motel." It looked like any other small, outdated motel you'd find off the highway. A few rows of rooms, some old cars parked outside, and the faint sound of an old AC unit humming in the background. I was tired, and the prospect of a warm bed for the night was enough to convince me to pull in. I walked inside, greeted by the old woman at the desk. She had pale, almost ghostly skin, and her smile was unsettlingly wide, like she was too eager to see me. But I didn't think much of it. She gave me a key to one of the rooms, and I paid for the night, grateful that I had a place to sleep. The room was exactly what I expected, barely furnished, the bed covered in a faded floral comforter, the kind you'd find in a place that had seen better days. The carpet was threadbare, the curtains too thick to let in much light. But I didn't care. I was exhausted. I closed the door behind me and locked it, collapsing onto the bed. The moment I closed my eyes, I felt the exhaustion of the road hit me like a wave. I drifted off to sleep, unaware that this seemingly innocuous motel would become the backdrop for one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Part 2, The Unseen Presence. It was just past midnight when I woke up. The room was cold, too cold for the middle of the night. The air felt damp and thick, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in an instant. My body felt frozen and my breath came out in slow, foggy puffs. At first I tried to dismiss it. It was probably just the AC, maybe it had kicked on too strong or the window was open a crack. But then I heard it, the faint sound of breathing. Slow, deep, laboured. It wasn't my own. It was coming from somewhere across the room. I sat up, my heart starting to race. I scanned the dark room, trying to make out anything in the dim light, but all I saw were shadows stretching across the walls. I told myself it was nothing, just the house settling. But the breathing grew louder, closer, like it was coming from right next to me. My eyes darted to the corner of the room, where a small antique rocking chair sat. I hadn't noticed it when I entered, but now it seemed off. It was moving, slowly back and forth, as if someone or something was sitting in it. I froze, unable to move. I couldn't take my eyes off the chair. It rocked faster now, creaking with each movement. The breathing was so loud, so close, I could almost feel the heat of it against my skin. My legs refused to move, as if they were glued to the bed. And then the air shifted. The room seemed to close in on me. The temperature dropped again, but this time it felt like ice was creeping into my bones. I couldn't breathe. My lungs felt heavy, constricted, as though something was pressing down on me. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table, my hands shaking, and tried to call the front desk. But the phone line was dead. Panic set in, and I stumbled out of bed, my feet barely touching the cold carpet. The chair stopped rocking, and I swear I heard the sound of something, or someone, moving closer. My pulse was racing in my ears. I ran to the door, fumbled with the handle, but it wouldn't open. It was stuck. No matter how hard I twisted, it wouldn't budge. I slammed against it, my body slamming into the cold wood. My mind was racing. Why couldn't I leave? Why couldn't I get out? And that's when I heard the whisper. It was soft, barely audible, but it made my blood run cold. You can't leave. You're not allowed to leave. Part 3. Trapped in the motel. The words echoed in my mind, sending a chill down my spine. The voice wasn't just in my head, it was in the room with me, hanging in the air. I could feel its presence, a heavy, suffocating weight that made the air feel thick, like I was breathing through a wet cloth. I backed away from the door, my hands trembling, eyes darting around the room. The rocking chair had stopped, but something had shifted. There, in the corner of the room, was a figure, a shadow, dark and still, watching me from the shadows. It wasn't a person, not entirely. Its shape was wrong, too tall, too thin, and the air around it seemed to ripple. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, rooted to the spot, unable to take my eyes off the shadow. The whisper came again, but this time it was louder, almost like it was inside my head. You're mine now. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare at the figure, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was closing in. The walls felt like they were getting tighter, pressing down on me, suffocating me. I was trapped. And then I heard the door behind me click. The door to the hallway, the one I had tried to open moments before, was slowly creaking open. A gust of cold air rushed past me, and I felt something, cold, like a hand, brush my shoulder. I spun around, my heart stopping in my chest. The hallway was empty, silent, but I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing from behind me. The shadow in the room didn't move, but it was still there, watching, waiting. Without thinking, I bolted toward the open door. I didn't look back. My legs burned, my feet pounding against the floor, until I finally burst out into the cold night air. I ran through the parking lot, past the old cars, and didn't stop until I reached my car. I didn't care that I was barefoot, or that I had no idea where I was going. All I cared about was leaving. As I sped away from the Pines Motel, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The lights from the motel were still flickering, and I swear I saw the figure standing in the doorway, watching, waiting. And I knew, without a doubt, that whatever was in that place, whatever was waiting for me, was still there. And it wasn't going to let me go. You may have heard the stories before, places that seem harmless at first, only to reveal something far darker when you least expect it. The thing is, these places don't let you leave. Once you've crossed a certain threshold, they own you, waiting for the right moment to show you their true nature. You can run, you can escape for a while, but sometimes the things you leave behind aren't ready to let you go. That haunted motel, the strange whispering voices, the cold hands reaching out when you least expect it, it's the kind of experience that sticks with you. It lingers in the quiet moments, in the dark corners of your mind. And when you least expect it, it returns. But one thing's for sure, when the doors open and the whispers start, there's no turning back. End of script. Sleep well.